Chapter 9. The air was so much colder after Meiling was gone. Shang welcomed it, letting the icy wind blast his face. There was no way in the 7 valleys he was going to fall asleep tonight. He was going to lie awake, staring at his ceiling, fighting against the memory of each moment with her, and all the times he could have kissed her. All the times he'd barely held himself in check. He would struggle in vain against imagining exactly what it would have been like to let his control snap. It wasn't fair to her if he kissed her and told her everything that was in his heart. He was going to die, one way or another. Meiling was too good, too sweet, too precious, and even if she didn't care about him romantically, which he was almost certain she did, she still cared about him. She cared about everyone, and she was right. He knew her. She knew him. Perhaps in a way neither of them had been known before. There was a bond between them he couldn't deny and couldn't resist. But that bond was the dangerous part. If Shang told her the truth, that she was his sun and moon and stars, it would only crush her that much more when he died. He didn't want to do that to her. If he truly loved her, he wouldn't break her heart. I should have kept my distance. Shang raked a hand through his hair, not sure how he was going to pull his composure back together before visiting Master Dong. The older man had always been able to read him better than anyone. "There you are," came a familiar, roughened female voice. Shang turned around to find Fen walking stiffly toward him. "Dragons, it's miserable out here," his friend growled. "How are you just standing here? Don't tell me you're an ice wielder. We both know that doesn't make you immune to cold." "Are your injuries bothering you?" he asked, frowning at her gait. She waved her hand dismissively. "It's the end of the day. I'll feel better tomorrow. For father's sake, come inside before I freeze my backside off." Fen had never been adept at reading him. Times like now, that was a relief. He followed her while she muttered complaints about the cold and led them inside. When they'd shut the door behind them and the cold was nothing but a draft, she turned to him, her face going fierce. "I've been thinking through this," she whispered. "I can get a few of my old masters to say something to the judge. I know someone who has a connection to him, and she would be willing to arrange introductions tomorrow night at the banquet. Even just an offhanded comment could—" Shang was already shaking his head. "It's too obvious, and it wouldn't work anyway. The trials are a secret. No one is supposed to know." "Well, what other options do we have?" she snapped, flinging her hands wide. "We're dead by the end of the week if we don't find some way to work this trial in our favor." "It's a trial. What are we supposed to do? It's out of our control." Says the man who broke out of Liafugan and into an enemy fortress? That was inside my control. "How is this any different?" she demanded. "Because this is a civil court case. You don't win by killing people or outsmarting your opponents. That judge has control over the outcome. And even the emperor cannot gainsay it without risking being deposed by the council." "Then get your father to bribe the judge. My family obviously doesn't have the money." "Bribery, Fen?" Shang lowered his brows. "Would you also like to flee the empire and face dishonorable execution on sight?" Fen's harsh expression slipped into something far more desperate. She reached out, grabbing Shang's forearm, hard. Her eyes pleaded with him. "You might be fine, but I will be dead if something doesn't happen. They'll kill me, Shang. They'll kill me. What will happen to my family then? How will my mother and siblings have anything to eat to survive the winter?" Shang's eyes shuddered, the weight of the entire world pressing heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't do it all. He couldn't protect Juninghai from Feng and keep Meiling safe, much less save his own life and Fen's. Blood was going to flow. Death would strike. That was the reality. He didn't need a seer's foresight to know that. "My father won't bribe the judge," Shang said quietly, and the words were almost physically painful. "If he knew everything, he'd kill me himself." Tears welled up on Fen's lower lashes. Until the journey with Meiling, he'd only seen Fen cry once. That was when they'd become friends, actually. It had cut him then to see the vulnerability behind the constant aggression, and it cut him again now. He reached out, clasped her forearm. "We will ask the fathers for a miracle." "You don't have enough money to bribe the judge yourself?" She was grasping at straws. He hated seeing her like this, reduced to begging for her life. "Of course I don't. Not until my father dies and I receive the inheritance. But chin up. I believe the Emperor is on our side. He is a fair and just man. For all we know, His Imperial Majesty is working for us to have a pardon. Don't give up hope yet." He gave her arm a squeeze, and she swallowed her tears, nodding. "You're right. I mean, why in the Seven Valleys are we here at the Academy instead of in the dungeon?" "Exactly." Shang forced what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is another long day. Don't overdo it training tomorrow." She huffed. "And give those students a break? I don't think so." His smile turned genuine. There was the Fen he knew. She cocked her head, her sauciness fading away. "Your father didn't come to visit you tonight. Even my mom made the trip." "I only just wrote him this morning that I was back in Suguan. I imagine he'll come tomorrow or the following day." Shang hesitated. Then, dropping his voice even lower, he whispered, He's in the middle of arranging a marriage for me." Feng winced. "Oof, that's awkward. Are you going to tell him about the trial?" Shang let out a long exhale. "Yes." "Double oof." "Indeed. I'll plead to the fathers on your behalf." "Please do. I'll be fine." He squeezed her arm once more and let go. She did the same. "Good night, Shifter." She rolled her eyes. "Good night, Iceman." The moment he walked away from Fun's welcomed distraction, fresh memories of Meiling assaulted him. He could have kissed her. "Stop. Just stop," he pleaded with himself. Did she have any clue that she drove him to the brink of insanity?
Floating in the sea of lanterns was not quite so ethereal as it used to be. In years past, Meiling had twirled among the lanterns, reading the riddles written on the side and trying to guess the answers. She'd spent hours delighting herself in each unique, beautiful design until the lanterns floated out of reach. Now, she sat on her windowsill instead, shadowy legs hanging over the long drop to the ground beneath her. "Don't go back to the academy," she told herself over and over again. "Don't follow him around like you're some puppy starved of attention. Have some respect for yourself." She tried to distract herself by mulling over her many problems. Feiyan, Zedong's impending conquest, Ma's vision, Shang and Fen's trial, her own reputation. Never would she have thought that there were aspects of living as Zedong's captive that she missed. She missed having her magic known. But the more Meiling thought about her time in his fortress, the more certain she became of several fledgling ideas, things she had not quite fully grasped at the time. When Zedong marched on Suguan, he would not be the same person who had run away from the academy all those years ago, and not even the same person she had escaped from. He was growing stronger. His black magic was strengthening. That last stretch of time she'd been imprisoned, when she'd been asleep, was mostly a fog, but she hadn't forgotten that he'd made her look into how the magic of his different prisoners worked. She leaned forward, glaring at the rising lanterns. Well, sitting here pouting was certainly useless. Maybe she would follow Shang. No, she would check on Fei-Yen and make sure she received the tea and tonic she'd sent. Yes, this would be a good thing for her to do. She slid off the ledge and flew toward the academy. She definitely was not going to hover near the spot overlooking the gardens where Shang had held her earlier and relive those moments through her imagination. Definitely not. Meiling wandered past the training grounds, which were still mostly abandoned by the celebrating students and masters. A few people lingered, but not many lanterns had been launched from here, making this area bereft of the glow. When she headed toward the library, an unfamiliar glow broke through the surrounding darkness. She wheeled in the air, trying to get a closer look. The glow was pure silver. She'd seen thousands of soul glows in her life, nearly every color of the rainbow. None, however, had been this bright, star-glittering silver. Something was wrong. Her rational mind spun, cobbling together all manner of excuses to fight the sudden sinking of her soul. It was only a unique magical ability she'd never come across before. She wasn't seeing clearly. The light was coming from something else. But when she lowered herself, coming closer to the silver glow, there was no further denial. The creature took the form of a woman, but not a youthful, fair woman. It was a middle-aged, slightly plump woman with hair knotted for function rather than beauty, clad in a plain robe. She smiled and held her arms out to a child, probably 8 or 9 years old, on the other side of the training grounds, wearing white. It was impossible for a 9-tailed fox spirit to be roaming the academy grounds. Impossible. With so many wielders around, impossible. But most of them were gone, and the ones that remained were only students. There was no way this was possible, unless Feng Zerong was behind it. The child gasped. "Ma? Ma! You came!" His dark blue glow pulsed brighter, and he broke into a run. Meiling screamed voicelessly. There was no time to find Shang and tell him about the fox spirit. She did the only thing she could do. She dove straight into the fox spirit's mind. Chapter 10. Meiling blinked. She stood, wet and salty and steaming, braced in a defensive stance. White fluttered around her eyes, the sultry sweet smell of sweat and the bitter grit of dust cloying in her nostrils. Just in time, her leg shot up, seemingly of its own accord, and kicked a blow aside. She breathed through an open mouth, shuffled bare feet in dirt, opposite a girl in white. This felt very different from every other mind she'd been in. The girl's braids flew in the air as she launched another attack at Meiling.
"Strength is not the only weapon. Use your enemy's strength against them,"
a voice called from behind her.
"Do not show hesitance or reluctance."
The girl bared her teeth, bursting with feral strength. Her training kicking in, Meiling watched the girl's eyes, not her movements, to betray her next move. The girl lunged to Meiling's right, and Meiling snatched her chance. Instead of trying to strong-arm the girl, she used the girl's momentum to propel her forward, to whirl her around and slam her into the ground, straddling her and yanking her head up to expose her throat. The girl gasped.
"Well done, Princess Meiling,"
the master in black said. Meiling stood, wiping her slick hands on her white uniform. She bent and held out her hand to the girl, who accepted it with a rueful smile.
"For one without battle magic, you are accomplished,"
said the master.
"Master Uju is awaiting you for your magic tutoring."
She could not help her smile as she bowed. "Thank you, Master." The smile remained pasted to her face as she strode out of the training grounds, head high and back straight, gliding with the grace of a princess and the prowess of a warrior. Why couldn't she frown? Why couldn't she stop her feet from moving, one in front of the other? Why did she feel like she occupied the body of another as she was dragged through this mind? Why did she feel like a puppet? The boy. She had to save the child, had to get out of whatever this was and find a way to save him before it was too late. She tried to rise into the air and fly, but her feet remained solid and dirty and calloused against the sand of the training grounds. This was solid, real. Despite how her mind thrummed with panic, how she struggled to make the smallest muscle obey her, she remained smiling and walking toward her next academy lesson. This was very, very wrong. Her insides hollowed out, her heart nearly bursting out of her ears. Each elegantly shaped foot stepped firmly out before the last, and her lungs screamed at the precise practice slowness. The midday sun beat hot and heavy upon her shoulders, her brow, her plaited hair. The boy, the boy, the boy. How much time did she have left? Was she already too late? One of the doors opened in front of her, and an icy hand closed around her wrist. Her mind wanted to fight, to twist and break his hold, but her body let herself be drawn into the room as the door closed behind her. It was a dimly lit scribal chamber. It smelled of dried ink and dusty parchment, crisp papers and bookish dryness. Unoccupied.
"The princess is early for her next lesson,"
rumbled a deep voice she knew like her own. She bashfully lowered her gaze, even while her mind nearly lost itself in a frenzy. She did not have time for trysts in abandoned rooms. The boy was going to die if she didn't get away. Shang smiled down at her, his handsome face softening and brightening at once.
"You have no explanation."
"The master is waiting for me." The words poured from her lips, trembling and hardly her own. "Let me go! I know you're not real. I know you're only a vision." But though her thoughts scrambled and banged against her throat, only a gasping half-breath escaped her. "Shang." His grip on her wrist tightened, warmed. Light flared in his eyes, bright and full of promise. Her mind faltered. Was she sure this wasn't real? Even if it was only a vision. Her heart pounded, lips parting, hands quivering. The strength with which she had just now overcome a classmate in battle fled her limbs.
"The people adore you,"
he mumbled, pulling her closer.
"You saw how they clamored for your blessings today during the parade, even more than the crown prince. Your magic is like nothing else in this world, Meiling."
His words were whispers, honey-sweet and silk-soft. "Save the boy, save the boy, save the boy."
"Please,"
Shang rasped.
"let me kiss you."
Alarm bells rang in her mind, and terror pounded in and out of her lungs. She wanted to break free of his hold, to turn and run, to race for freedom. "Please don't be too late to save the boy." He pulled her into his arms. Physically, she gave only token resistance, her traitorous heart pulsing with more than fear. In her mind, she screamed. She wheeled and banked and scrabbled and yanked. It was useless. Shang's arms were no longer icy, his touch no longer frozen. His skin warmed and warmed until it burned into her back and her arms. His fingers burst into flame, and he carved a searing, burning caress down the side of her face, from her temple to her jaw. He changed. His butter-soft smile shifted into a leer, his teeth growing longer and sharper. His nose melted into a long, silver snout. Black as night eyes turned to gleaming, hungry diamonds. When he spoke, it was not Shang's voice that emerged from between fangs and snarling black lips. "I will have you instead of the child." Flame engulfed her, choking smoke, her own shrieking fear. 9 silver tails, tipped in white, whipped around with the excitement of a hunter cornering his prey. Idiot! Idiot girl! She should have known better than to enter the mind of a fox spirit. Should have known! The fox spirit opened its gaping maw, and its teeth came for her neck. Chapter 11. Meiling knew nothing but the agony of flame and tearing teeth. She had no power here, no strength to resist as fangs ripped into her soul, shredding her to pieces like a tiger mauling its prey. There was no refuge to be found in oblivion. She couldn't even scream. There was no room for cohesive thought, not even for the realization that this was her horrible, wretched, anguished death. Soon there would be nothing left of her to devour. But then, the faintest voice, calling to her, reaching for her. Teeth tore into her soul again, but Meiling latched onto that voice. It became her lifeline and the tiniest refuge from the torment. Suddenly, something caught her, wrapped around her, and shielded her. The consuming fire was gone, the snarling jaws snapped shut. She lay in vague awareness, still unable to move or make a sound. Pain pulsed through every part of her mangled soul, what was left of it. But she was held. She could endure this. "Hold on, Meiling!" the voice called to her. "I've got you!" So Meiling held on. Slowly, bit by bit, the pain ebbed. A river of gold threaded with emerald wound around her, knitting back the pieces of her that had been torn away. "Keep holding on. We're almost there. I've got you, friend. You're going to be all right." Meiling woke as the faintest light of dawn melted on her face like a first snowfall. Warmth coursed through her veins from a hand holding hers. She sighed, opened her eyes. "Feyen?" she croaked, blinking against the dimness and the bobbing of a nearby candle. Feyen lifted her head from the edge of the bed, her eyes bloodshot and half-closed. Her gasp echoed around the room. "Meiling! Praise the fathers!" She peeled her gaze away from Feyen, moving with sluggish effort toward Ma's pinched and drawn face, hovering so near her own. 2 warm hands claimed her free hand. Pa leaned over her, his skin a ghastly pallor. She frowned, looked down to find herself tucked safely in her bed, just like she had been last night. Her gaze traveled the breadth of the room again, pausing on each of the 3 faces. "Why are you all here?" A confused, almost awkward pause filled the room. Meiling knit her brows and pulled her hand free of Ma's so she could scoot into a sitting position.
"Your guards heard you screaming,"
Pa said eventually. Now that her sleep-muddled brain was clearing, she noted the wetness of Ma's face, the sheen over her doe-like eyes. The nightclothes her parents wore, the knotted and disarrayed state of Feyen's hair. "Screaming?" Meiling repeated. Vague vestiges of a nightmare, of fire and teeth and unimaginable pain, scrabbled at the edges of her awareness. If she tried too hard to remember it, it vanished altogether. Why was Feyen here just for a nightmare? She sat up straighter, suddenly more alert. How could she have had a nightmare? She hadn't had dreams since her magic developed. "When they opened the door, you were covered in burns. You had one here." Ma traced along Meiling's cheek. A flashing memory of Shang drawing her into his arms, tracing his finger exactly the same way assaulted her, and Meiling jerked back. Ma's hand froze in midair. Not a nightmare. Not a nightmare. Something happened. Something real. Something that was both real and not real. "Where's Shang?" she blurted, her heart racing. And then it came back. The fox spirit. She tore her hand free from Fei Yen, flinging her legs over the side of the bed. "The boy! Pa, hurry! There's a fox spirit!" Pa placed a square hand on her shoulder and pushed her back down onto the bed. Ma shuffled aside so he could kneel next to Meiling and envelop both of her hands in his.
Meiling, the fox spirit has long been killed. Hours ago, by Hu Fen, one of your former protectors. The fox spirit harmed no one.
Meiling tried to process this information, tried to reconcile it with her hazy recollection of last night. A blush seeped into her cheeks at the memory of Shang's words, his insistence as he drew her into his arms. Everything she saw in that vision was a mirror of herself, what she wanted. She closed her eyes, fighting tears, fighting shame. To think that the boy's life could have been lost because of her vanity. Finally, the rest of last night came back. The excruciating pain as the Moagui devoured her, the moment a shield had wrapped around her, protecting her as she was restored. Pa released her hands, and she dropped her face into them. There was a whispered, "You may leave," followed by a muted shuffling on Meiling's left. Her head shot up. "Fei Yen!" she cried, reaching out toward her friend. You saved me. How?" Fei Yen pursed her lips, glancing quickly at Ma for permission to answer. Ma nodded once, tightly. Fei Yen turned her sagging frame to Meiling, and it was like all the light had fled her face. "I was summoned immediately, and I barely reached you in time. I thought it was too late. The fox spirit had consumed parts of your soul. It took all night, but thankfully, you have recovered." She had been awake through the night, healing nonstop. When Ma dismissed her again, Meiling did not protest. She was too shocked to even utter the smallest of thanks. Instead, as soon as the door was closed, she sputtered, "Pa, you must send for her masters and tell them that she must rest today."
The healer cannot be spared that long,
Pa said, shaking his head. "What?" Meiling cried, trying again to leap out of bed and was again restrained by her father. "But you saw her! She'll be ill! She cannot—"
"You ought to have considered that when you foolishly entered a fox spirit's mind,"
he snapped, fire burning brightly in his pupils. He immediately lowered his head, breathing deeply through his nostrils, trying to regain his composure. She fought tears.
"Meiling,"
he said, much gentler.
"Fox spirits devour body and soul. You know this. By entering its mind, you let it devour you soul first. I know your heart, my sweet girl."
He reached out, gripping her knee under the quilt.
"I know your good nature. You cannot watch suffering. This is good. I do not wish you hardened. But your goodness must be paired with wisdom. You must not rush headlong into situations you are unequipped to handle."
"You would have me stand by and watch people die?"
"I would have you not pay a price you cannot afford."
Dawn bloomed pink through her window, catching on the lines of Ma's face. The fear in her eyes reflected the sunlight. Meiling averted her attention to the back of Pa's hand on her knee. She picked at the embroidery of the quilt. They did not have to say it. She understood what Pa was trying to tell her. By attempting to save the boy, she cost the Empire's one healer her few hours of rest. Her impulsiveness required Fei Yen's bone-deep exhaustion and sleep deprivation, or the deaths of the people she would have healed if she could sleep today. The cost was greater than only her life or the boy's life. Yet she would do it again. She could not stand by and watch the boy die. Bile rose in her throat, brackish, bitter, and salty. "You called for Shang," Ma said. "Your other protector? Tan Shangdi?" Meiling nodded mutely. Why did you call for him? She looked down at the silk nightdress she wore. Not the white academy training garment she'd worn in the nightmare. How real Shang's touch had felt. Her wrists seemed to throb and freeze where he had snatched her and dragged her into the scribal chamber. I thought he was in danger, she lied. She hated lying to her parents.
Meiling,
Pa said quietly, taking one of her hands again. His tone was even more serious than before, making goose flesh raise along her arms and the back of her neck.
there's something we need to tell you.
Meiling stiffened instinctually, fighting the urge to pull her hand away as she glanced between the intensity lining Pa's face and the tears filling Ma's. Pa drew a deep breath.
Your first night back, when your mother had a vision, it was about you.
Ma's face crumpled. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Pa's gaze shifted to her, pain racking his features, but he continued relentlessly, his voice only barely quavering.
She saw your body on the floor of the throne room.
Alarm ripped down Meiling's spine. My body? She repeated, almost stuttering. My dead body? Pa's hand was almost crushing hers. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it, as if he couldn't get the words out. He only nodded. She stared at him in shock, waiting for him to continue, to say anything at all.
It might not come true,
he said finally.
but it could come true.
Have Ma's visions ever not come true? Meiling asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Pa glanced at Ma, his jaw flexing.
Very few haven't.
I know you feel suppressed, Ma interjected suddenly, and there was an underlying thread of ferocity in her voice, despite the tears. But there are so many forces at work against you. We are fighting for a chance for you to live, Meiling. That's why we hid your magic, why we still hide it. It's not because we don't believe you are capable of incredible things. We know you are. You've already performed shocking feats of skill without any training. But we want you to live, my dove. Meiling bit down hard on her lip. She hated herself for the scraps of resentment she'd carried toward her parents for choosing this path for her.
We thought you deserved to know about the vision,
said Pa, lowering his voice.
We don't want to frighten you, but it is your life. You should know. You should also know that we love you so very dearly, and there is nothing we want more than your life and happiness. There is very little we wouldn't sacrifice for that.
His words hit her harder than she expected, a resonance of Shang's words to her last night. So many people despised her. It was a crushing burden she'd borne most of her life. And yet, the people who mattered saw her, loved her. Maybe she'd been so caught up in the opinions of strangers that she'd failed to see how deeply her own family loved her all along. So Meiling threw herself into her father's arms, burying her head in his shoulder, but her words were for both of her parents. Thank you for working to keep me safe. I love you.
Shang forbade himself from attending this morning's parade. He'd managed enough sleep to regain a fraction of his senses after the commotion of Fen killing a fox spirit on Academy grounds, and those senses told him he ought to renew his commitment to keeping his distance from Meiling. That started with not ogling her during the parade. Even if it took every ounce of self-control to keep himself firmly occupied at the academy, training a few students who'd rather practice their combat than join in the festivities. It would be better if he focused his energy on the puzzle of last night's fox spirit invasion. How had such a thing happened? Was it just coincidence? Or had Feng expanded his Mwagwe control to include dragon-blasted fox spirits along with the phoenixes? How in the Seven Valleys was it possible to trap a fox spirit? Then again, he'd once believed it impossible to trap a phoenix. After nearly 2 hours of grueling training, the sun crested the horizon. The students asked for a water break, and Shang obliged. He took a long draught from his water skin, then pressed an ice-cold hand to the back of his sweaty neck. He didn't even have to use his magic. His hand was already freezing from the cold. His toes were numb too, and he hardly cared. He was taking another drink, about to order the students back to work, when a curiously familiar figure walked across the bridge from the palace complex, her steps heavy. What was the healer doing at the palace so early? "Oh, fathers," Shang breathed, hoping the sudden pounding of his heart was just his paranoia. It could have been anyone that needed healing. The younger princess could have burned herself on her own fire. The emperor could have fallen ill, or perhaps his queen had. The prince could have injured himself doing something stupid. But despite her slumped shoulders and the haggard circles around her eyes, Fei Yin walked straight to Shang. His gut plunged into the earth. He had already pulled away from the students, grabbing his tunic from the railing bordering the pits and pulling it over his sweaty torso, when she reached him and said, without a single note of her characteristic sarcasm, "I need to speak with you." Shang's heart nearly stopped at those words. "Tell me she's alive," he demanded. "She's alive." He closed his eyes, running a hand down his face. He cursed under his breath, then fell into step beside the healer. They walked in silence down the covered portico until they reached a deserted stretch far enough away from those with both normal and augmented hearing abilities. Shang's patience nearly snapped. Somehow he maintained control. Part of it was due to his pity for the bone weariness of the healer's movements. She might normally find immense satisfaction from tormenting him, but right now, he couldn't maintain his usual frustration with her. "Meiling is alive. She is in full health and is completely fine," said Fei Yan as a preface. That only served to make his dread sink deeper. "The fox spirit last night." "What?" he demanded. "She went into its mind." Shang's world stopped. One instant became 100, then 200, 1,000, all while his entire being screamed internally, "No, no, no, no!" It almost killed her. She didn't have to say the words aloud, but they struck him like blows anyway. He staggered to the wall, caught himself, and slid to the ground. He ran his hand through his hair, then grabbed a fistful of it. "The little boy that was almost caught by the Mwagwe, the one that Fen saved. I believe she was trying to save him." Shang let out a growl, something akin to rage pulsing beneath his skin. Of course she was trying to save the child. Of course she nearly threw her life away doing it. Of course she didn't stop and realize the consequences, or the alternatives. Obvious alternatives, like entering the boy's mind instead. What was she thinking? He growled, even though they both knew exactly what she was thinking. That there had been someone in danger, and that Meiling would never stand by while someone died. Even if it sometimes made her make the absolutely stupidest decisions. "How bad was it?" he asked, terrified of the answer he already knew. Fei Yan was just now leaving the palace, and Fen had killed the fox spirit over 7 hours ago. Fei Yan was silent for a long moment. Then she gave a single, nondescript answer. "Bad." Shang groaned, pressing the heel of his hand into his eye socket. The next time he saw Meiling, he was going to strangle her. But she's fine now. I was able to mend the damage to both her body and her soul. Body and soul. How had she not realized that she'd handed her soul over to a predator when she'd entered its mind? He tried to tamp down on the rising fury and sudden panic. She's fine. She's fine. Meiling is still alive. She's healed. I'm sorry, Fei-Yun whispered. I was ordered to secrecy, but you needed to know. Thank you, Shang croaked, and wished he had more to give her in thanks for what she'd done. Thank you. I didn't do it for you. I know, but I thank you anyway. Fei-Yun's heavy footsteps thumped away, giving Shang privacy as he wrestled his composure back under his control. Then, with a growling curse, he shot to his feet, not caring to change out of his tan-colored training clothes for his full black robes. By all the fathers, he was going to the parade again. He had to lay his eyes on her just once to prove she was all right. So he did. He didn't find nearly as good of a view as yesterday, but his height continued to lend him the advantage. When the palace gates opened and the royal family finally emerged, there she was, sitting straight in her saddle, her face an elegantly serene mask. She was beautiful, as always, with not the barest trace of what she'd endured the night before. He sagged in relief and coaxed his heart back into its normal rhythm. His darling was fine.
Chapter 12. Ma wasn't part of today's parade. Instead, she was spending the day with her elderly parents, as custom dictated, for the second day of the festival. Meiling's mind spun as she let herself be aided onto her horse, puzzling over last night. Was there a way she could enter a fox spirit's mind without endangering herself? Or rather, was there a way to not be ensnared upon entering? There would always be danger, but could she work her way around it, remain unscathed? It was a difficult thing to test. She plastered a smile on her face, thanking the fathers for the 18 layers of paint she wore, but couldn't forget the vision in her mind. The memory of the unabashed praise, her triumph over her classmate in a battle. Shang's words of the people's adoration as he pulled her closer. Folly. Her mind had betrayed her. Her secrets and her faults stared back at her, unrelenting. It was only when the gates opened, as the people cheered, as her horse put one clopping hoof before the next, that the engulfing cries of the people distracted her from her thoughts. "Bless my baby!
Give my firstborn your bountiful blessing!"
The throng pressed harder than yesterday, holding out swaddled newborns dangerously close to the road. Her eyes roved over the people, but her hands stayed fixed in her saddle as her siblings and father blessed the babies thrust in their faces. Next to a ragged, dirty woman holding out her baby stood a man in fine tailored robes holding his own child out. The desire for blessings transcended rich and poor, honor and dishonor. She kept her smile pasted to her face and wondered if tomorrow she could convince her maids to paint a smile on her face so her mouth wouldn't hurt so much after the parade. Her eyes rebelled, and she found herself scanning the crowds for a tall form. But Shang was nowhere to be found. Not that she actually believed she could find him in a crowd this big. Her smile slipped for one instant when she spied a hunched, cloaked figure ahead, pressing to the front with the young parents. Why did her hackles rise? Why did she suddenly hear that scuttling sound again? Her hands went clammy on the reins, cold and slick. She rode past the hunched figure. As she did so, the head lifted, and beneath it shone eyes hardly visible between the folds of a crinkly smile. A long white beard. Missing teeth. He looked straight at Meiling. Why did she feel like she'd seen him before? She passed the man. When she twisted to look back, he'd been swallowed by the sea of people stretching for miles through the city's winding streets.
Shang kneeled on the woven mat in the courtroom as the scribe droned through the traditional prayers. Fen sat beside him, her features arranged in a scowl most wouldn't recognize as her resting face. Today, the real investigation would begin. He stuffed any trepidation down deep inside himself, stuffed all emotions down where they wouldn't show on his face. The scribe finished his prayers, rolled up the ancient scroll, and adjusted his spectacles. Judge Lean's small, piercing eyes shifted to Shang, then to Fen. The interrogation began.
"Hu Fen,"
began the judge.
"do you confirm that while you were injured, Princess Meiling, no magic, was captured by Fang Zedong?"
The first question confirmed it. They'd need a miracle for a pardon. Shang kept his face expressionless as Fen frowned, but answered, "Yes."
"Tan Shangdi, do you confirm that while you were distracted fighting, Princess Meiling, no magic, was captured by Fang Zedong?"
He was as good as dead. What kind of a question was that? He hesitated, turning the words over in his mind, then answered, "Yes." A black-haired head poked over the edge of the viewing gallery. It was a very subtle movement, so subtle no one but Shang noticed, and he only noticed because he'd been watching for it. He shut his eyes and exhaled. For all her sweetness, Meiling could be stubborn as a mule. At least she was alive.
"Hu Fen, do you confirm you broke protocol not once, but twice, when you left Princess Meiling alone and unprotected outside the village Wonghai?"
Fen shifted, protests bubbling up on her lips. She restrained them, thankfully, and merely answered, "Yes."
"Do you also confirm that you broke protocol when you attempted a rescue of Li Feiyan, healer?"
"Yes." Shang had known from the beginning that decision would cost them both.
"Tan Shangdi, do you confirm you broke protocol by leaving Princess Meiling alone and unprotected to go after Hu Fen?"
His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath, even as his jaw clenched. That hadn't been an easy decision, but even with Fen, they'd been outnumbered. Shang had gone after her because if he hadn't, Meiling would have been even more at risk. But there was no room to say any of that. He could only give a single, emotionless yes. A second movement from the balcony drew his eyes. Only this time it wasn't Meiling failing to stay hidden. A second head, this one concealed with a hooded cloak, poked over the edge of the railing. Shang's blood turned to ice.
Meiling slid her fingers onto the railing and slowly lifted her face until she could see over the edge, down into the courtroom. Everything looked the same as yesterday, with the judge seated upon the dais, a man standing to his left by a pile of scrolls, and Fen and Shang seated on the judge's right. The viewing gallery remained mostly empty. She hated being late, but it couldn't have been helped, not with how late the parade had gone. It was good to see Shang again, with his severe stoicism, and remind herself that the vision she'd seen of him in the fox spirit's mind wasn't real. Still, the questions being hurled at him and Fen made her fists clench against the railing. They were asked as though the nuanced answers were completely black and white. Even the questions directed at Fen were unfair. Fen hadn't abandoned her outside that village. She'd left first to scout the area for Moi Gui. That was protecting, not abandoning. She left the second time to burn the fox spirit's body, which was arguably not the smartest decision, but she did it so the smell wouldn't travel into the town and give away their presence to the villagers. And Shang's questions were far worse. Distracted by fighting? Her blood boiled. Shang went after Fen because she was outnumbered and would have been killed, and if she had been killed, Meiling would have been at more risk than before. Protocol was short-sighted and stupid. The door opened behind her. The voices droned on below, but she spun as a hunched form hidden beneath the folds of a black cloak, his long white beard the only distinguishing feature. She recognized him immediately as the man she'd spotted in the parade, the one who had raised her hackles. She stayed where she was, kneeling on the floor, but planted one foot firmly on the ground, ready to flee.
"Ah, the Princess Meiling,"
croaked the old man, lumbering up the stairs faster than he should be able to. He smacked his gums, smiling with 3 teeth.
"What a lovely spy you make."
"Stop where you are," Meiling hissed, rising but staying crouched beneath the railing. "I'll scream if you come closer." He gave a wheezing excuse of laughter. He held up both hands in a placating gesture.
"Forgive me, I forget myself. Please, may I join you?"
She was silent, still poised for escape, still tense as a deer cornered by a hunter. He grinned.
"I suppose I have not introduced myself now, have I? I'm Hu Fen's grandfather. Word reached me of her trial, so I came to watch, like you. Are you related to her partner?"
She did not respond, still eyeing him warily. Grandfather? He certainly was old enough. Was that why he struck her as familiar? She'd encountered him at some point, not realizing who he was? She doubted it. Taking her silence as consent, the old man wheedled his way up and plopped himself on the bench, leaning on the railing like Meiling had done yesterday. He did not bother to fling back the hood of his cloak, but just stared between his wrinkled skin at the scene below. He smacked his gums happily, like this was some game. Her rational mind told her nothing was wrong. It was only an old man. She could definitely outmatch his faded strength. So why did goose flesh erupt on her arms? Why did the hair on the back of her neck rise? She should focus on the trial. She was missing important information.
"Tang Shangdi, do you confirm?"
"Honored Judge." Shang shot to his feet, bowing deeply with his arms outstretched.
"I request a 5-minute recess."
Meiling's breath caught, her attention darting between Shang and the frowning judge. The frown turned to a scowl as the judge regarded Shang, still bowing.
"The audacity,"
the judge spat, his old withered hand quivering. Shang's words were cool.
"Is it not correct that each defendant may request 1 recess at any point in their trial?"
His words hung in the air.
"Recessed,"
the judge growled. He leaned forward, shaking his finger at Shang's face.
"You are not helping your case, boy."
Shang bowed again, ignoring Fen's gaping mouth, and strode quickly out of view. Meiling's held breath spewed out. Questions whirled in her mind. Shang, who was one of the most professional and collected people of her acquaintance, had interrupted the judge? Whatever for? Was he so bothered by the questions that he needed to leave? That did not sound like him at all.
"Strange,"
the old man cooed.
"Strange boy, strange boy."
He wheezed again, making a loud sucking sound. She wanted to urge him to be quiet, but her throat was dry and no sound would come out. The door opened. She twisted away from the railing, Her eyes widened when it was Shang pulling the door shut, a stormy expression on his face. He took the stairs 2 at a time, but did not look at her even once. His gaze was fixed on the grinning old man. "Out," Shang growled, nodding with his head toward the door. "Out before I drag you down the stairs." The old man's white eyebrows shot high on his forehead.
"Ah, boy. I'm just here to support my granddaughter, Leave."
The man sighed, the air seeming to rattle around his lungs.
"Youth these days,"
he grumbled, getting to his feet and eyeing Meiling.
"They're all paranoid idiots. Won't give an old man any respect."
She looked back and forth between the man clambering down the stairs, muttering as he went, and Shang, who stood low enough on the stairs that he wasn't visible to the judge. The muscles of his jaw flexed tightly. Finally, the door closed behind the man. Meiling lifted her eyes from where she sat on the floor behind the railing. Shang turned from staring at the exit to look down at her. She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Her thanks wouldn't leave her tongue.
"Fen has no grandfather,"
Shang said, black eyes piercing.
"Do not let him come near you again."
"Who is he?"
"I don't know."
She couldn't deny her relief that the man was gone. Her shoulders dropped a little, and finally she managed a quiet, "Thank you." He stayed silent for a moment, even though he must only have had 2 or 3 minutes left before he needed to return to the courtroom. She racked her brain for anything more to say, but could think of nothing except insisting that the trial was being unfair, which he already knew. Shang climbed the stairs back up to her and sat on the top one, only a foot or so away from her. Close enough that he could reach out and touch the tips of her slippers peeking out from her silk. His gaze never left her face.
"Why did you enter the fox spirit's mind last night?"
She stilled. "Who told you?"
"Feyen told me."
Feyen? How had she had the time to do so? Pa would have sworn her to secrecy, so why had she told Shang? He lowered his face for a breath.
"She thought I should know. She said it almost."
His eyes snapped to hers, burning black.
"How could you be so careless?"
She drew back, her face hot. Her arms tightened around her legs, as if it could make her smaller and disappear. Her gaze fell from his face to his hand, planted on the floor, splayed out wide. "I could not let the boy die," she mumbled.
"Meiling,"
he whispered urgently, leaning forward.
"You are noble, the most noble person I know, but you cannot afford to be stupid. Understand?"
Her heart caught on the word noble, and something burst like 100 butterflies from their cocoons in her stomach. But her mind caught on something else. "Stupid?" she cried in a low voice. "How could I have known what would happen?"
"By simple deduction. If a fox spirit can devour a soul, and it can, then it can devour your soul entering its mind."
His lips pursed tightly, his gaze flicking above her head to the railing, as if counting his seconds left. He blinked a few times, drew a deep breath, exhaled. His gaze returned to her.
"Promise me you will never enter another fox spirit's mind again."
Her brow furrowed, and she tilted her head to one side. "Promise? I cannot make such a promise. There must be a way around its enchantments." Shang reached out, pried one of her hands free of her knee, and gripped it hard. She instinctively jerked back, but he tightened his icy hold.
"Promise me,"
he pleaded urgently.
"I need you to promise me, Meiling."
She stared at him, mouth agape. Shuffling from below met their ears, mingled with the impatient grunt of the judge.
"I have to go,"
he growled, letting her hand drop.
I don't care who you're saving. Don't enter a fox spirit's mind. You cannot win.
He drew himself to his feet without another glance toward her and hurried back down the stairs, as fast as he had climbed them. Silently, he shut the door behind him. Meiling stayed where she was, staring with parted lips at the empty stairwell.
Chapter 13. Former General Tan sent word of his arrival in Suguan, and Shang obtained special permission, via Master Dong, to leave his students early and visit him. In many ways, this seemed a truer trial than the one he'd already attended. For his entire life, his father's approval had meant everything to him. He'd done anything, sacrificed anything, just for the chance of a warm word or the tiniest shred of a smile. But then, Meiling happened. His perfectly ordered life had crumbled to pieces. Now, there were things he wanted that he was willing to sacrifice his father's approval for. And in that knowledge, Shang discovered that approval hadn't been worth much in the first place. Still, it was a challenge to keep his heart rate steady as a servant let him into his father's Suguan mansion. He had to keep a rein on his emotions and focus on his goals. Stop the marriage arrangements before they got too far and explain that he was going to be executed in a few days for failing a special mission from the Emperor. This wasn't going to go well. General Tan was taking his afternoon tea in an outdoor pavilion, despite the cold. Shang kept his face blank as his father's ramrod straight back came into view. Gray hair streaked the older man's long hair and beard, but at 65 years old, he was still as tall and strong as ever. He didn't smile when Shang bowed and sat on the cushion across the low table. He didn't offer a greeting as the servant bent and poured Shang a cup of tea. It wasn't until the servant was finally out of earshot that the former general settled his penetrating gaze on his son. "Why were you so late in responding to my letters?" "I was not in Suguan, my lord. I responded once I returned." "Why were you not in Suguan?" the general demanded, small but potent shards of anger in his tone. "Your appointment is in Suguan. Where else could you have been?" Shang kept his voice neutral and calm, his expression blank, and his emotions detached. "I was on a personal errand for the Emperor." "What errand?" "I am not at liberty to say." The general's brows narrowed. "Are you telling me you got involved with secret services?" "No, my lord. It was a personal errand for the Emperor, not for the secret services." "I don't like that patronizing tone, Shang-Di. It was a fair question." Well, Shang didn't like the general's tone either. He didn't offer an apology. Instead, leaning forward and letting just a touch of coldness into his expression. "I didn't come here to be interrogated, Father. I came because I am delivering news, the first of which is this. You must cancel the marriage arrangements. I won't." The general's hand slammed onto the table. "Cancel the marriage arrangements? They're all but finalized. Is it the girl? I don't see any objection to her. I've seen her myself, and she's a pretty little thing. Smart, too, with a pure ice lineage. There's nothing. I'm sure she's wonderful. But then marry her. Don't tell me you've gotten some foolhardy notion into your mind about securing your own marriage. I've told you since you were a child that I would be arranging it, and you've never had an objection your entire life." Shang dropped his voice, leaning forward onto the table, and said with deathly calm, "Let me finish." The general's mouth dropped open, shock almost immobilizing him. Shang had never talked back or interrupted. Even now, it went against every instinct inside him, which told him to placate his father, to show respect and obeisance. "I will explain everything if you would let me," Shang continued quietly, taking advantage of his father's shock before he recovered enough to explode into anger. "I have many reasons for refusing this marriage, but the one worth mentioning is that He swallowed, his composure fracturing just a hair. It was easier to think the words than say them out loud. "I am to be executed after the last day of the festival." Sure, there was still a chance he'd be pardoned, but after today's trial, it appeared less likely than ever. If the general had been shocked a moment before, now he was completely stunned. "The errand was a failure," Shang continued, gentling his tone. "It was not my fault, but the cost of failure was our lives. The Emperor has put us, me and my comrade, on trial. We do not anticipate being acquitted." The general's teacup rattled when he set it down, orange tea sloshing over the sides. Shang had never pitied his father until this moment. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such ill news. You understand now why I must reject the marriage arrangement." A broad, muscular forearm swept across the table, smashing teacups, saucers, and teapots into the pavilion wall. "Understand?" the general bellowed. "I understand nothing. What do you mean this errand was a failure? What do you mean it wasn't your fault? If it wasn't your fault, you'd be acquitted already. You know that is not how it works." Do I, Shang-Di?" He shot to his feet, coming around to Shang's side of the table as though to grab him. "I ought to kill you myself." Shang darted out of the way, lightly stepping out of the pavilion, and noted his retreat options if his father decided to execute his threat. "I gave everything," he shouted, despite knowing nothing would convince his father. "I broke out of Liafugun without getting caught. I fought in Butagan. I escaped Fang Zedong's own fortress dungeon with 2 of his captives. By myself. But you would say, it is not enough!" The general filled the entrance to the pavilion, ice gleaming in his fists. "You should have fallen on your own sword instead of coming back here in disgrace. Does the Tan name mean nothing to you?" Why did Shang even bother? He should have just let his father discover with everyone else that his only heir was being executed. The marriage arrangements would have been halted naturally. He'd known this was how his father would react. And yet, it cut like shards of ice into his chest. Maybe part of him had hoped he'd been wrong, that his father loved him more than his reputation after all, that he wasn't just an heir to continue the family lineage, but a dear son. Well, he had his answer now. Despite that he hated how they would end their last time seeing each other, Shang was glad he knew the truth. And he was glad that, for once, he hadn't bent his knee to someone who didn't deserve it. Shang turned his back on the general and marched away. "Goodbye, father." "Stop right there, or you're no son of mine." There was the inevitable disinheritance. Shang didn't stop. "The errand had to do with the princess, didn't it?" Shang stopped, slowly turned. The general still stood in the pavilion's entrance, his severe face a thunderstorm. "I told you, I'm not at liberty to say." "You rescued her from Fang's fortress, didn't you?" With a long exhale, Shang ignored the general's question and kept walking. His father had always had his own spies around the palace. It was no surprise he'd heard of Meiling's capture and subsequent rescue. He'd known about all the missing wielders when so few people did. You escorted her back to Suguan, didn't you? And you didn't keep your proper distance, did you? Don't let him provoke you. Nothing he says matters. Nothing. No wonder you've lost everything for our family. She's brought her curses down on you. She's a witch, that girl, and she's going to— Shang's control snapped. He whirled on his heel. Princess Meiling is the daughter of your sovereign and deserves your respect, father. Respect, the general bellowed, storming down the steps of the pavilion toward where Shang stood his ground on the walkway. That little minx should have been cast out a decade ago when her magic didn't develop. It's her curse that is bringing the barbarians down on us. Shang's voice lowered to a lethal snarl. Princess Meiling is the best person I have ever known, and she might be the only truly innocent person in that palace. I will not tolerate you speaking ill of her. The general stopped, shocked for the third time. He recovered quickly, shaking it off and replacing it with menacing fury as he growled, She has bewitched you, boy. You've fallen under her thrall. No wonder you're not yourself. You're not seeing clearly. There was no reasoning with him, no understanding. It had always been orders that Shang was expected to follow. There was no point in arguing further. He'd accomplished what he set out to do. So he left, his father's angry tirades slamming into his back as he muttered under his breath, I've never seen clearer in my life.
If the first night of the Festival of New Lights was Meiling's favorite, the second night was her least favorite. Painted and arranged until her maids clucked with satisfaction, Meiling rose and looked at her face in the mirror. Red dots lined her brow, reminiscent of the queen who wouldn't be in attendance tonight. She drew in a deep, fortifying breath, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't ready for the stares and whispers, the people who shuffled out of her way, fearful of her shadow falling upon them. It doesn't matter, she muttered to herself, straightening her shoulders. Her maids trailed by twos after her as she glided out of her bedroom and through the palace hallways. She had faced brigands and feng zerong, muagui, and hard journeys on unforgiving terrain. She'd been on the brink of death several times now. A few courtiers were nothing. So why were her palms so dragon-blasted sweaty? The doors opened before her.
Princess Meiling!
The crier announced. Meiling smiled, swallowing her blanch at the sight of the room. This was the same feasting hall from last night, but the silk partitions were tied back, leaving the room vast. Doors opened into the night, giving guests the opportunity to meander through starlit gardens and admire the moon reflected in gurgling fountains and lily-filled pools. So many people. Robes of all colors glittered under 1,000 candles. Brilliant sashes gleamed. Chatter filled the room as Meiling slipped inside and searched for a familiar face. Pa was seated on the dais toward the far side of the room, visible to everyone. He sipped from a goblet, his attention diverted by a few fancy-dressed courtiers who dared approach him. She longed to join him, perhaps even take Ma's empty seat, but she restrained herself. Princes and princesses must socialize. Except no one wanted to socialize with Meiling. Where were Hao and Yun? She found herself backing into a wall, trying to find a niche to snuggle into. Why was she breathing so hard? Unconsciously, she fidgeted with her sash, but stopped herself the moment she realized what she was doing. Her stomach churned when Pa's eyes flicked toward her, his brow furrowed slightly. She was being a terrible princess. There was Hao, dressed in a soft pink lined with beads and silver thread. She kept glancing down at her robes, tugging on her sleeves and moving too fast for her headdress, making it rattle precariously. but she stood with several guardian daughters her age, chatting happily. Meiling drifted closer as she complained, "All this fancy getup is making me want to just rip it off. How am I supposed to fight in this?" "You're a princess," laughed one of the girls. "You can hardly rip your ornaments off during a banquet." Hal raised an eyebrow. "Watch me." Meiling hurried forward, stepping next to Hal and trying to ignore the other girls casting her strange looks. "Sister," she said with a smile, "you look lovely. How was your combat class earlier?" "Oh, hello, Meiling," Hal said, taking her hand away from her headdress, not noticing at first how her friends immediately tensed at Meiling's presence. Meiling glanced quickly at the girls, and her heart dropped when each one bowed and made an excuse to take themselves off to another part of the banquet. It wasn't a surprise, but that sense of lostness returned to settle on Meiling's shoulders. A familiar movement caught her eye, and she dragged her attention from the fleeing girls to find Shang dressed in a well-tailored, fine robe of dark blue, leaning against the far wall next to several other young men, goblet in hand, gaze flitting between Meiling and the girls. Her stomach flipped over itself from the sudden influx of embarrassment and thrill. Shang's gaze met hers suddenly and fled away just as quickly, as though he hadn't meant for her to see that he watched her. He took a draught of his wine, then interjected something in the conversation. The other young men laughed in response. "You scared them off," Hal said with a quirked eyebrow. "Not that I'm disappointed. Maybe I should bring you with me to the academy. There are a few people I'd like you to scare off for me." Meiling tore her gaze away from Shang. "Oh, well, I'm glad to help." She swallowed thickly. How dry her throat felt. "I can assure you I'm quite good at that." Her traitorous eyes peeked at Shang again, who was looking down and smirking as one of the other men seemed to tell some story, waving his hands about in apparently funny gestures. Why was he even here? She assumed he would share only in the duties of the Academy Masters, not also the honors and privileges. Apparently, she was mistaken. "Oh, look! It's that man from the other day!" Hao nodded toward Shang, tossing a mischievous grin up at Meiling. "Fathers, but he is so handsome!" Meiling gave a little laugh, hoping Hao would not notice how forced it was, and rolled her eyes. "You're 11. What? You're saying I'm too young to know when someone's pretty or ugly?" Meiling shook her head, smiling. Hao narrowed her eyes into a glare, daring, challenging. Meiling laughed outright. She glanced at Shang as she did so, and his head jerked her way at the sound of her laugh. She immediately looked away. "Hao, what do— Oh, I need to talk to that girl over there, and the boy I'm going to marry is next to her. Here, give this to a servant, will you?" "The boy you what?" Meiling hardly had time to catch the sloshing goblet of punch thrust toward her before Hao scampered off, abandoning her in the middle of the room. As soon as Hao departed, the lightness in the air dissipated, and the world closed in around her. So many people, so many faces, many she recognized, none she dared approach. All swarming about and laughing and socializing and doing people things. Her breaths came shorter and shorter. She drifted toward a corner, depositing Hao's goblet on a servant's tray as she whisked past. She counted the minutes until the earliest possible moment of escape. There was Fen with a rare smile on her face. She sidled up next to Shang, and the two began conversing. Even from where Meiling stood, hovering listlessly by the tapestries lining the wall near the door, she could see the way Fen's smile quickly vanished, how Shang's lips pursed. She needed air. Clear, cool, starlit air would open her lungs and prevent her from suffocating. She stepped away from the wall she clung to, dodging around fluttering servants and trying to ignore the sideways glances and quick sidesteps out of her periphery. She gritted her teeth, focusing on her destination, The wide-flung doors opened to the moon-bathed gardens. Being born without magic was no crime, unless one was a princess. Then it was a crime above all crimes. Sticky, flowery perfume cloyed in her nostrils, and her robes clung to her skin in the oppressive warmth of several hundred bodies pressed close together. She stepped faster than she ought, evidenced by the clinking of the strung beads on her headdress. Perhaps she was swallowing back tears. She was too angry to notice. If only they knew. She should be thankful, should enjoy the happy laughter surrounding her. Had she heard such a joyous sound in Feng Zedong's prison? She should feast her eyes on the beauty of the bright, illustrious colors of the palace, filled with the loveliest shades from the occupants' robes. This place was alive, good, the very opposite of that rotting dungeon. What was wrong with her? Why could she not be happy with this beautiful life of hers? It was because she was tired of being looked upon like a plague, a curse. She could never hurt any of the people in this room. Though she possessed the ability to enter their minds, harvest their secrets and shames, she could ruin these people with the secrets she unearthed. She would not do it. A blast of chilly wind met her as soon as she reached the doorway. The chill prickled her neck and cooled her hot cheeks. She stepped through the line of guards, lifting her robes just slightly so she could step over the threshold into the fresh night air beyond the clogged room. She drank in the stillness. It was not entirely still, however. Whispers, scuffles of slippers and boots, and the trees and shrubs swaying in the wind filled the garden. The nights were growing colder and colder, and she wrapped her arms around herself, hugging in her warmth. Her teeth chattered. It would not look good if she went and lost herself in the depths of the garden, hiding from the festivities. But no one wanted her here anyway. They only expected her to be here. She would tarry outside a little longer. A set of stone stairs descended into the garden. As she took a step, the first notes of a flute from inside wafted out to her, above the laughs and conversation buzzing in the air. It swelled louder, and the further Meiling wandered down the pathways splitting around the large reflection pool, the clearer it sounded over the din. The reflection pool was not large, but it was stuffed to the brim with lilies and lily pads. She chose the seat furthest from the colored paper lanterns hung around the garden. She leaned over the edge of the railing and touched the soft edges of a blooming white flower. Voices carried to her ears. Male, edged with courtly refinement, mingled with battle-hardness. Meiling sat up straighter, casting a quick look down the lane of budding cherry trees.
It was successful, yes.
And they are returning? A second voice queried.
Indeed, tomorrow. It is a quiet reception, but the families of the captured have been informed. They are to be received around mid-afternoon, so the report said. Behind the palace, near the west gate.
After all these years, some of them will likely not be recognizable. There was a faint tisking sound, then a deep sigh. Hearing the Guardian had died was quite a blow. I still cannot believe it. The Xuan I knew would never. The voice trailed off, as if he was not quite sure what he intended to say. There was silence for a long while. Meiling held her breath, her hand still hovering over the flower. When the voices resumed, they were too far away for her to understand. She strained, half stood, considered going after them, but stopped at the sound of another voice. This one from behind her, and too familiar.
Eavesdropping?